Previously on A Goat and a Fox Talk About Movies. Scorsese, he likes to tell the story of...
Is he coming out with something new?
Is he coming out with something?
He might be. I don't know. I've heard Leonardo screaming in the distance, so maybe.
Well, we mix these families together, and that estate money flows the right direction. It'll come to us.
Our boy Marty's back at it again. Killers of the Flower Moon follows Ernest Burkhardt, a perpetually pouty Leonardo DiCaprio, who returns home to his uncle William King Hale in Osage County. The Osage Nation has struck it rich with oil. An indigenous people having something valuable, though? That can't be right. So King Hale oversees a dastardly scheme to steal those oil rights away for the white man bit by bit. And Molly Kyle, played by Lily Gladstone, marries Ernest, only to find herself the epicenter of this greedy conspiracy. Will justice be meted out by the end? Will your bladder hold through all 3.5 hours? Stay tuned and find out.
So, Reynard, what did you think of Killers of the Flower Moon?
Yeah, I liked it. I think that, I'm okay. Hot take, right? Scorsese is obviously one of the kind of the Rushmore of American cinema currently, as far as living filmmakers go. I tend to favor his kind of more off-center films. I'll take an After Hours or a Kundun or a Silence over what is maybe his more celebrated canon being his gangster pictures. I don't really like Goodfellas or Casino or whatever. They're well-made films, but I don't like them. Personally, this is maybe the platonic ideal of his gangster picture, especially in the second half when it kind of becomes more of a courtroom thriller. But
first of all, you wound me. Goodfellas is so good.
It's fine.
I'll give you my little spice to take here. I think I like Goodfellas better than The Godfather even.
Okay, well that's a take.
No, I mean I haven't seen The Godfather in a long time.
Do you like it better than Godfather Part 2?
Maybe. It's been a long time.
Let me qualify that. I think that the reason that I don't like Goodfellas, for example, is there's this sort of edge of indulgence there. It feels like film bro adjacent, where it wants to have its cake and eat it too. Whereas here you have kind of you have De Niro giving this really slimy performance, and you have all this kind of conniving, dirty crime world, right? But it's kind of qualified with a moral epicenter. There's consequence here, whereas with your Goodfellas or what have you, Departed, it's kind of there's a Bonnie and Clyde element to it. But here we kind of right. He's matured, I think, as a filmmaker, even though he was 58 or whatever when he made Goodfellas.
And again, I'm not seriously trying to put you on blast or anything here. Yeah, I know. This is it's people can have whatever film opinions they want. Oh, isn't that wild, YouTube? Isn't that wild? But no, yeah, I feel and you do hit upon a really good point here with this movie, because I really loved this movie, Killers of the Flower Moon. Thought it was wonderful, wonderfully crafted. Very powerful story. For its long length, it doesn't feel like a 3.5 hour movie. It keeps up a great pace, and it does keep that moral epicenter where even though we're following Ernest, who is very much complicit in Hale's evil schemes, Hale being the sheriff of the county, so he can basically turn the eyes away from the crimes that are happening. Like, you know, Ernest is very much complicit in that, and at every point in the movie you can feel it's very much like, now this is some really fucked up stuff that they're doing. And Lily Gladstone as Molly, definitely, like, you know, she is like that center there because her family is ravaged more than most, even within the Osage community.
Yeah, I think like this film is incredibly broad and dense in what it goes at, and the storytelling approach that it takes is really interesting. But like, I think the real center of it all is kind of this dichotomy between the performances of Leonardo DiCaprio and Lily Gladstone, where you have this like Leo is making all of the choices, as he usually does, but like he is very much like this active, verbose, boisterous presence, whereas Gladstone is very still, and it's all about like a subtle shift in the expression, kind of signaling more than a monologue ever could, really. And then kind of De Niro forming like the balance point between these two. But yeah, it's really, he's able to, like, this film is both like operating on this grand scale and also looking at this very intimate relationship and kind of reducing everything down to that.
Yeah, because it really takes like this broad, because I looked into the actual history of this. It's known as like the Reign of Terror in the Osage Nation in their history. And this story basically unfolded over 20 years. This whole conspiracy went on for a long time. And all that time, though, it still feels anchored. It never feels like, it doesn't feel like it loses itself or anything. Like, it would be very easy for a 3.5-hour movie to feel lost, to feel, especially for something that is, like you said, this dense, that's putting this much into everything. But there's different points where you can really tell, like, he does this little, you know, Scorsese has a way of pacing a movie where it can feel like he's able to get exposition out in a way that's very engaging, very striking. Like when he starts introducing the murders, what we'll see is that, like, you'll see somebody lying on a bed, so like the name, you know, when they died, and you know, no investigation, and that's like all that'll be said about most of them, and you can pick up right away, like, okay, something really shifty is going on here. And there is one where we actually see the murder happen, and it's all the more striking for that. You're like, oh shit. Like the whole theater I was in, like, was shaken in that.
Yeah, the film takes this like kind of collage approach, I would say, to its overall structure. We open with kind of almost newsreel footage of just kind of explaining to the viewer, who presumably isn't versed in this chapter in American history, like kind of that the Osage Nation are relocated to Oklahoma Territory, and their land is rich in oil, which quickly makes them incredibly wealthy, which is problematic, as you said in your synopsis, to, you know, the white population in America, the European colonizers. And then you kind of get this mix of that, and then, as you're saying, this like almost like direct address kind of documentarian style like montage that kind of increasingly lays bare how empty justice is for the indigenous peoples. Originally, they're just Gladstone's voiceover is just saying there's no investigation, and it builds towards this crime committed that we see, and it's ruled officially a suicide, which kind of introduces to us as the viewer the emptiness of any sort of justice for these people. You know, the fact that Jesse Plemons, as the federal investigator, eventually comes out rings incredibly hollow in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, because Jesse Plemons, because at first, like, when he arrives, I was kind of like, oh, maybe something's finally going to get done about this King Hale guy, because, yeah, Robert De Niro's performance as King Hale was, like, absolutely just so slimy, detestable. I was like, I want to say I was like a third way through the movie, like, every time he was on the screen, I was like, oh, you. Mm-hmm. And in fact, as you were talking, that just made me realize something interesting, because as the murders are introduced again, it's mostly the voiceover, but then, like, we see the crime committed, voiceover saying it was ruled a suicide, and it kind of has this thing, like, at first it's like it's kind of suspicious, and then it becomes more blatant, and then you're like, okay, no, like, something really bad is going on here. And it kind of mirrors how, like, as things unfold, they become bolder, they become more and more, but, like, oh, there's no consequences, we can just do whatever we want.
Exactly, and that feeds into the overall superstructure of the narrative, where Scorsese kind of unspools these crimes that are committed and like kind of layers in like the initial instigation of something and then its outcome, but like that's not necessarily, like, there's still stuff in between that we're going to kind of circle back around to. And it both, like, within the structure of like a film, just like to generate intrigue, it works, but also it kind of creates this sense of almost hopelessness where the criminal getting away from it is inevitable because it just happens right away.
It's almost like Martin Scorsese knows what he's doing.
Almost. Yeah, but how do we get introduced to these characters?
Like, how do we get introduced to them?
You know, kind of let's go back and kind of bring us into this film. Like, you know, DiCaprio's like, coming back from the Great War, coming to Oklahoma.
Yeah. And, like, you know, his uncle is like, it's got my little estate out here, does, like, cattle and everything. And and also, you know, running this little conspiracy and everything. And also insurance fraud that comes up later in the movie.
It's interesting, though, because the way De Niro's character is kind of unfolded is he's such a snake in the grass, because he pretty much, like, lays out on the table the first scene when DiCaprio comes home and he's like, all right, well, I'm here now. You get, like, kind of the essential statement of, like, you know, if there's all these Osage people, they have the rights to this oil, but if we can kind of insinuate ourselves into this, we can get that money if the right things happen. So, you know, he's shady, but, like, you also kind of get, like, his public persona is so much more benevolent. Like, he speaks the local tongue. He's very much, like, given the kind of saying the right thing. So it takes some time for you to kind of realize his essential evil, which becomes ever more apparent as the runtime goes on.
Like, he gets, like, donations, to start, like, a dance school, and they're like, look at this upstanding member of the community, and I'm just there, like, sitting in the theater, is like, it's a lie, he's lying, and then everybody yells at me to shut up in the theater.
Can I just say, I had a very rambunctious screening. It was like, there was this, like, Statler and Waldorf, like, couple up in the back corner that would just, like, exclaim loudly, and just like, nobody needs to hear your thoughts in this matter. Like, get your own fucking podcast. And then, like, this other person who apparently maybe never saw a different Scorsese film, because, like, the film's not gory, but it's got graphic moments or shocking moments, and they, like, reacted very dramatically. It's like, did you not expect this to happen? But it's fine.
maybe they should have watched Goodfellas. Yeah. And then they would know what to expect. But yeah, it's like, it's... Because I feel like, this does have, like, violence. Like, there's, like, blood and everything. It doesn't feel, like, gratuitous, but it's just enough for you to feel, like, the shock of, like, oh, shit. Oh, shit. Also, I just said, Ernest, like, the Ernest, such a dipshit. Like,
yeah.
And I think, like, there is a really good line that kind of gets bounced here, where it's like, because in the end, he is instrumental to getting the, like, a lot of the ringleaders of the conspiracy into, like, a courtroom. So it's like, okay, like, he did one, like, a good thing he did, but again, that was only after threat of being put in jail for longer. It was self-serving because he's like, oh, I have to be around for my wife and kids. He still isn't honest, even at the very end of the movie, with his wife about how deep he was and what he was doing. And just like by the end, it's just like, yeah, this guy's just a piece of shit.
Yeah, that's like, this is one of those films where, like, I mean, plot is never the most interesting thing for me to talk about. I think, like, if you watch the film, you watch the film and you get what you get. But the Everett figure kind of speaks to two elements of the film, being the performance of Leonardo DiCaprio and also the character of Jesus, what's his name? Ernest, there we go. God damn. In many ways, Ernest doesn't go anywhere as a character. We have him as, like, he's a useful idiot for Hale throughout much of the runtime. He's this kind of fall man who is very obedient, who can, like, carry out tasks for him so he can kind of continue his, like, mafioso style kind of crimes. He's not very good at it. Like, every time that he's asked to do something apparently incredibly simple, he fucks it up in some regard, or, like, he defers to somebody else who is even more, useless. But there's also no real, like, development of him, because he kind of flip-flops back and forth. Initially he's brought on as when we get to the point of a federal investigation, he becomes a witness for the prosecution. But he's swayed almost immediately by the lawyer for Hale, an incredibly shady move, which that's amazing, the fact that they just let that happen, but okay. But then again, he eventually wanders back to persecute his father. The film creates, like, the illusion of some sort of development, I think, in the way that Ernest names Hale. Initially he's Sir, which is pretty kind of submissive, and Hale, like, is like, no, you can call me King. And you're like, okay, this man.
The audacity of this.
Great. So we get to that point, kind of, which cements him as this, like, like, the heavy in the area. But in that final confrontation or discussion in the jail cell, he finally just calls him Bill, which is, I think, a really important moment in some regards. Would maybe signal that he has fully kind of realized his sins, or whatever you want to call it. But then again, like you're saying, like, the fact that he cannot admit to his wife that he poisoned her, that he gave her heroin, I believe, that signals that he's gone nowhere. He's an empty shell.
And I do feel like that kind of, like, the fact that he didn't develop that far, I feel like is... I do feel like that is intentional on the part of the movie, because this seems to be, like, a kind of story that Scorsese likes to tell. The idea of someone who through like they say like, oh, you know, this guy that I know in the neighborhood, like this person that I know, they get a lot of money. Is a way that I can get into that. So they agree. They get into it. They're on top of the world, and then things crumble around them, and they suffer the consequences. You know, it's something that we've seen in a good number of his movies, and I feel like that's a similar thing here, where, you know, at the end, Ernest, you know, even if, you know, he ended up cooperating with the federal authorities, because I feel like even then, like, that wasn't him being like, oh, I'm going to do the right thing. It's, oh, you know, it's like, oh, you know, my kids might, you know, like, I have to, you know, come out and see my kids, so I'm going to take this because it's the best chance I have to not get jail time. So it doesn't feel like he's really turned against his uncle for, like, not necessarily for the right reasons, but just like, I'm going to do this because it works for me best.
Yeah, it's the path of least resistance. He's very much like a cul-de-sac of a human being.
He's also very, very pouty. Very pouty.
Can I...
Please. This is what I've been waiting for since we started.
You're just waiting. You're sowing the seeds. I fully recognize I'm in the minority here, but I don't like the choices that Leonardo DiCaprio makes as an actor. By and large, I think that he's successful in this film, but it's more a casting like thing than him as an actor. Because I think my problems, I was like thinking about this mildly before this recording, and I think my issues are maybe twofold. One, he's one of those actors which is kind of just, it's always Leonardo DiCaprio as so-and-so. And you can never fully divorce yourself from that, which you see that in a lot of things, but I just am not attracted to that specific star persona or whatever. He's also just so contemporary, and like I think it's like maybe a combination of like his hair and his voice or something. There's something je ne sais quoi that I just can't. He's always like so contemporary in this case, like the kind of 1920s or whatnot, or Gangs in New York was egregious, for example. But like, I think he kind of works here because I think, one, let me just say, Jesse Plemons would have been the more interesting choice as the character whose name I've again forgotten. Ernest goes to jail. Okay. It's the latest in the Ernest series. I keep wanting to call him Edmund for some reason. Anyway, I think Jesse Plemons would have been more interesting as Ernest because he's so good at that kind of weird, pathetic villain role, but that's not what he got, so it's fine. But Leo is solid here because, like, one of the things about him is he's always acting and he's always like making choices, and Ernest is doing the same thing. Like, I can always see on some level or other, like, the gears turning in Leonardo DiCaprio, the actor's head, when he's in a scene and he like has to do something to like put extra mustard on a moment that maybe doesn't need to happen. But like, that's what Ernest is doing all the time because he's like trying to seduce Molly, or he's like trying to insinuate himself into a situation, or he's trying to be the hard-headed like mafioso who's like gonna convince this random loser to like commit a crime for him. And so it's good that he's so just kind of try hard in it all, and it kind of works, like maybe in spite of what DiCaprio would intend, but also maybe it's because he has to act like he's in love with a woman who's older than 29, but
my God. Oh, you had to go there. You went there. Yeah, it's like, I think for me, it's like he did you know, he fit the role all right. But I totally get what you mean, where it's like, yeah, when he's in a movie, kind of just was like, hey, I'm looking at Leonardo DiCaprio, whereas like, you know, you look at something like you know, like Willem Dafoe, like when he is really getting into a role, like he'll become whatever needs to happen.
Yeah, I feel like this like whole Scorsese DiCaprio partnership kind of like brings out the best and the worst of that actor.
And again, I feel like De Niro, like De Niro, like he really brought that, like that a new, like that energy in there, where it's just like, where he played this character so well that he did like disappear a little bit more, I think, where it's like, you know, that's William King.
Oh, he came to fucking eat. Yeah, like that was so
was like,
just creepy, and the way he was able to layer this like sociopathy with, you know, outright acts of aggression was so interesting. And his relationship to Leonardo DiCaprio is more like when he gets like he fucking spanked, the like way he just abuses Ernest is so disturbing, and just these masochistic power dynamics, you know, and the fact that like Ernest goes to jail, doesn't understand that that's so fucking creepy, whereas Molly is just like terrified of him throughout the entire ordeal is fascinating.
Yeah, like I think like in terms of like, I can't think of the last time I saw like a cinematic villain that curdled my stomach like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's been a long time. I was like, holy shit. And again, like Lily Gladstone, she does a great job of like, again, she is very much like an emotional core of this movie, because the specific murders we focus on, because a lot of this happened, like even like if you see this movie and you see that stuff, that we just see a slice of this whole conspiracy and what unfolded. Mm-hmm. But this movie we follow, like, I think it's her sister, her mother, who isn't killed for the money, but still, she's lost. Different members of her family are killed over time, and it's just heartbreaking to see her just kind of like break down more and more with each death, and just like this poor woman.
Yeah, I think that's both like a testament to her skill as an actor. Like in the first act or so, when Ernest goes to jail is courting her, like there's a lot of "it's me for real" moments for me, where she just kind of like is sitting there, like there's this like little like sardonic expression where she's like, "You're an absolute dipshit, but I'm kind of still going for you," kind of, you know, like girl, same, whatever. It's interesting, like you're saying, this is just a slice of the whole thing. Like even in 3.5 hours, I don't think you could like encapsulate the broad scope of this entire episode in history, and I would never expect for him to do the same. But it kind of like, there's this period in the middle which was the weakest stretch for me, where she is kind of asked to become like the vessel for like the totality of the suffering that is being visited upon these people. She is sickly, she's diabetic, and she's also being drugged with opioids, and just like is on her bed suffering, and we're kind of cutting between like that and like the other crime elements of the film. And you get these instances of like, this is impacting the community as a whole. Like for one time, like they're driving down the street and you see like a family moving out, like, and they've got all their stuff in like the trunk and on a trailer and everything. And you're like, wait a minute, this is so much, there's so much fear and uncertainty in this entire community that I'm not really seeing. And it's all like, she's kind of expected just to like be there to portray all of that. And it's not misery porn by any stretch of the imagination, but it kind of starts to skirt that territory for me, where it's like she exists to suffer, and I don't know if I love that aspect of it. It recovers quickly enough, but there's a little bit in the middle there where it just kind of like you start to get that like his interests are a little bit more in the kind of crime thriller element than kind of like focusing on the impacts upon the civilians there, if you will.
Yeah, that makes sense. I did see a review that was interesting. That was a very positive review, but they did remark that the person who wrote this was a member of the Osage Nation.
Mm-hmm.
And they remarked that while it is a very like respectful portrayal of the story, that Martin Scorsese was very much involved with the Osage Nation in making this movie. While it's very respectful, it is still a white man's perspective on the story.
Yeah.
And again, that's not to say like, oh, that somehow diminishes its value, but it is just a part of the story. That is, and I hope that with this movie being out, with people talking about it, because at work, I'm like, oh, I saw this movie recently, and people are like, oh, I've heard about that. I was interested in seeing that. So it's great to see that this is hopefully going to get people more aware of this chapter of our country's history and start looking into it more.
Mm-hmm.
It's 3.5 hours, but it is still a start.
Yeah, no, I think it does feel very like earnest goes to jail in its
I'll give you that for you.
in its intent.
And I think what's interesting is that we'll kind of like now actually kind of jump towards the end of the movie here just for really quickly.
Yeah. And we've been wholly independent of any sort of plot structure here, which is good.
Yeah, we talk about it the way we want in the order we want. It's our podcast.
Exactly.
At the very end of the movie, it wraps up like a radio play, which I thought was a really interesting framing device, where we find out where William King Hale like went to jail and was released. Ernest, where he went, where Molly went, and we even get man himself, Martin Scorsese, who, if I remember correctly, he read like the last lines of the movie.
Yeah, he
right?
got the literal last word. And
it is interesting to kind of to have it capped off feeling like almost like a bulletin of sorts, like a news bulletin. So it does leave with that impression of being like some kind of news report or a history report.
I read it as more a perpetuation of like a cycle of exploitation in a way, because it was a true crime, like basically the antecedent to one of those weird trashy true crime podcasts you get, unlike the amazing film discussion podcasts that are out there. But it was like a Lucky Strike produced commercial piece that was basically commenting on this whole thing, and ostensibly they told the whole story and whatnot. It's kind of like commodifying the real grief and loss of these people and making it into this very kind of consumable little entertainment piece, which Scorsese in a way is doing himself, and he's kind of like absolving himself of that sin by getting the final word and acknowledging it in a way. I don't think it's exploitation at all. Like, it's, that's a really extreme stance to take, but it's certainly interesting to think about. But then the other element to it all is like kind of how he's kind of like looking, I don't know, beyond the fourth wall. Like the content that is being laid out in this radio play is everything that you'd get in a movie as like intertitles, like after the screen fades to black. So he's kind of like taking a jab at that as well. He's having his, his little like conclusion and wrapping it up nicely, but doing it in an interesting cinematic way.
That is an interesting interpretation of it, whereas like he's like because I was going to say like I don't know if like putting himself in there,
I don't know if I like that.
What?
He stepped in and I was like, oh, I don't know.
Okay. Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
I don't know if I love Scorsese's self-insert.
It does feel like an interesting way to kind of leave like a personal like last note. And I do think that it does give the movie a little bit more personality than just having, like you said, the intertitles of just like, here's where everybody ended up. Having it be a little bit more dynamic.
It does kind of feed into that sort of like multimedia approach. Like again, he introduced it with newsreel footage. He inserts kind of like archival footage, whether it's real or kind of mocked up throughout. He has that kind of more like direct address documentarian stuff. Like it's an interesting end cap and kind of a novel way to sort of close things off.
Yeah, like you called it like a collage, I believe is what the word you used. Yeah, so it's a very I wanted to use a word that's more interesting than just interesting because I feel like I've used that a lot. It tells the story in a very dynamic, engaging way that I really enjoyed. And I'm just kind of partial towards like historical stories anyways, like these like true things that are being told, these like, I guess, I don't know if you would call this like a social drama kind of, but I just really enjoy these kinds of stories, and I think he told this one quite well.
Yeah, I think that it's like a fascinating chapter in American history. It's not happening in isolation. He kind of contextualizes it with like the Tulsa massacre that happened around the same time, but it's something that shouldn't be silenced.
I like that you kind of made that connection because Tulsa, the race massacre, is also something that was for so long an untaught part of U.S. history. But over the past few years, there's been more awareness of it. There's been more discussion of it.
Yeah, it's just sort of like people of color like being prosperous and then being killed for it. Just this.
And I appreciate that, with this kind of story, it also adds more context because I think, I don't think anybody in the United States would honestly be like, yes, it was good what we did to the Native Americans. I don't think that is a mainstream opinion, but I do think it's mainstream that people think it happened in like the 1700s or the 1800s. And I feel like this movie is a good way to show that this kind of appalling, shocking violence, like this like naked violence, happened a lot more recently in our history than we think. Yeah. Than we would like to think.
Yeah, it's not something that was like quote unquote back then, meaning I don't know if 2 centuries is acceptable to do that kind of horrible thing, but
yeah, it's Martin Scorsese. He's practicing intersectionality.
Here we go. Is he quote unquote doing the work?
I honestly like a lot of the work he actually does, like besides making movies, just like we're preserving films, trying to lift up marginalized voices. Like he does a lot of really great stuff.
No, I think he's so important as like an advocate for cinema, as like a cineast or whatever. Like his World Cinema Project, kind of finding and preserving and films from underrepresented countries and stuff, and serving as a producer for a lot of projects that might not otherwise get off the ground. Like he's really an important figure in kind of our current cinematic constellation, as it were. And it's really exciting to see him make movies, and I would love for him to make more, but like even just that aspect of his work is so exciting.
Yeah, in my line of work, I've met people who have met Scorsese, and they say he's a real chill guy. Like, I don't know, just like all around, he seems like somebody who, I don't know if there's anybody alive that loves cinema more than Martin Scorsese loves cinema.
Well, he's on Letterboxd now, so like maybe he's gonna become a really complete nightmare.
Oh no!
Just gonna make meme reviews and.
I could just imagine like imagine putting it like a review down for a movie, like because I just leave like one-liner joke reviews on most of what I watch. Imagine that, and then just getting a reply from Martin Scorsese in the comments.
I'll just say mid.
Oh no. I hope all his reviews are just like either this is cinema or this is not cinema. It'll be truly a Reddit moment.
Are we not entertained?
Speaking of Reddit moments, I did not know Brendan Fraser was in this movie.
And he announces himself in the most dramatic fashion as a Trump attorney.
Oh my. Because it's like it's he doesn't have a big role.
Mm-hmm.
He's only in like the last like half hour maybe
and just a couple of scenes or whatnot.
Just a couple of scenes, but just like when because it's like his courtroom and everything, and all of a sudden he was like, "Your Honor," and then the camera cuts him like rising from his seat, and I was like, "Oh my God, it's Brendan Fraser!" And that just brought me so much joy.
No, there's so much depth in the like supporting cast and stuff. Like everyone really like whether they're like in it for a major like through line, like the guy playing Byron, who like I feel like I've seen his stuff before, but I just can't place, or just the random kind of miscreants that they kind of encounter. It's all like top to bottom really good. There's a weird number of like musicians that he cast, like Jack White. The guy from the White Stripes is in the radio play. Sturgill Simpson is in there. There's like a lot of random. It's like, oh, I guess you're also like roots music or something. But
casting was all so great, and like again, like Leonardo DiCaprio, like I feel like he works best when he's put into roles that he can naturally fit in. It's like with it's like Dwayne Johnson. You just got to cast him as... You got to build something around him that he can fit into, because he's not going to carry a dramatic role of any kind.
DiCaprio needs a scene where he screams a lot, and we kind of get one of those. I mean, we get several, but like the one where he's like having a breakdown about his wife refusing the insulin is probably his big like I have to scream now scene. And then he needs a scene where he's like at his nadir and he's like bedraggled and stuff, and that's the scene where he like drinks the whiskey that he's like tippled with the heroin. And so you get those boxes checked, but he's like definitely a little bit less ridiculous than like the Aviator or something. So
yeah,
yay for him.
For me, like when I think of his role, I think of like Inception, where he has like that slick kind of like feeling there, which is like, I don't know, like I always think of it as like my Leonardo DiCaprio movie, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word.
I reject all Leonardo DiCaprio films.
Hey, we gotta preserve Titanic at least. Like, come on.
We can preserve the Celine Dion song.
Just have Celine Dion be every role.
Just cast her as all of Leo's roles, and then we're fine.
Anyway, we were talking about Colors of the Flower Moon. Let's see. One more thing I do want to like emphasize is that, again, this is a bit more of like a plot thing, but I really appreciate movies that show how banal that it can, a lot of these cover-ups can be, because some like, oh, there's like this super secret shadowy thing of like elite ninja stuff that's going on, but in this movie, like literally, like they are able to gain, King Hale and his co-conspirators able to buy so much time just by going, ask the county, ask the coroner, ask the courthouse, just leading things in a circle, because that's like how so much in the real world, how things get covered up. It's just talk to someone else, talk to a different office.
Yeah, the act of like when Hale kind of quote unquote like hands himself over to the sheriff, who is completely complicit, and like at one point is like, maybe don't be so fucking obvious, but also I'm not going to arrest you right now. It's this kind of small town, us against the big government situation, and they're all so like, that's always the first thing they go to, aside from just racism, is like, but the feds are shitty, so meh.
Speaking of like small town, let me tell you, because you have like, was it like the banker who's like in control, who are basically, they take custody of the finances of the OC, and then you just see him later in the Ku Klux Klan parade. You're like, oh Jesus Christ!
Yeah, no, it's another way that like even from the start, that like even if the Osage had, like they have the wealth, but it's still controlled. There's still choke points, like preventing them from getting what is owed to them in some way or other.
And it just really strikes me because sometimes like things really are like in real life just like that obvious, and people just let it happen. And it's just like, geez. Again, I'm really glad that this is out there. It's getting people talking about this kind of a thing. And on top of that, just the movie overall, fantastically crafted. This is what Martin Scorsese's been doing this for 50 years, and he's still putting out bangers like this.
Yeah, no, it's a really engaging, enthralling film to watch. I really did enjoy the final shot of the film, which I think is also maybe the first of the teaser trailer. It's just like this kind of really enthralling, I think a drone shot probably just kind of like pulls out from like a drum out to this massive dance that's happening. The entire movie has like, so there were a lot of scenes with, I was like, holy fuck, there's a lot of extras here. But that was like the most extras, like just this massive dance. And it really kind of just sort of celebrated this, indigenous people, where like their first scene is them kind of admitting some sort of loss, to they're burying some element of their cultural practices and stuff, and saying that, these colonizers are going to become a dominant force in the area, even though we've been here since time immemorial. But that final shot kind of presented them as, remaining in some sense, and that was encouraging.
I hadn't thought about that, but that makes so much sense, because like it opens with the Osage people, and the film concludes with the Osage people, and it even has like now thinking about it, does have this sense of like, because they're burying this pipe, like, oh, our children will forget our ways, they will learn the ways of the white man. But at the end, I have, at least what I'm assuming, what it looks like, a traditional dance, a traditional celebration. And so it's like, there's like some hope, like, not all has been lost.
Yeah.
So much has been lost, but not everything.
Yeah, it's a really, just a nice final image to kind of reflect on.
I think I got all of my thoughts out of what I wanted to address. Things that's, again, like there's so much that can be dug into, but I feel like just, for this little discussion here, there's like the main things I wanted to talk about. Any other parts like that you wanted to address?
I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much for joining me tonight, and thank you all of you lovely folks for joining us from wherever you might be listening to us from. We'll be back in a couple weeks with, I'm not sure what we're going to be doing again yet.
We'll figure it out.
To check our we'll figure it out. We'll figure out something. I've been Daniel Goldhorn, Daniel Goldhorn on YouTube.
And I'm Reynard /cinema over on Tumblr.
And we'll catch you all next time. Good night.
Cheers.